It is time for our speculative fiction panel. All right, do me a favor, please put your hands together. Welcome your moderator. Give it up for John Keekery.
Thanks. Hi, I'm John. That was just my stunt double. Anyway, so I have some amazing authors here to talk to you about speculative fiction in South Africa. Please welcome, in a bold and wonderful Cape Town way, Mitchell Lüthi, Kerstin Hall Mia Arderne, and Jen Thorpe. And I'm just going to do some funky music while they come on. Okay, they awkwardly put me in the middle, so that's fun. Hi, everyone. I'm here with 4 authors who are better known for writing than they are for talking. So everyone just be cool and calm and no sudden movements so we don't get startled. I would appreciate that. I'm going to start off with a very simple question, and I think you should be able to answer this quite easily. It is, who are you? I'm going to complicate it slightly with a what do you write and why? Can we start with Mia?
Thanks, John. Yes, you can. My name is Mia Arderne. I write magical realism and a bit of fantasy, but in a pretty dark crime noir kind of way. It's extreme violence, lots of swearing, lots of sex. And that's who I am.
No, but you didn't answer the why.
The why?
The why do you write that?
Shit.
No pressure.
I really enjoy violence, I think. I think that's why.
No, we all. All right.
It's going to be really quite hard to top. I enjoy violence, but hi, I'm Kerstin Hall. I write weird fantasy novels because I like weird fantasy. What else do I need to answer there?
I don't know. That seems like a pretty good. You write weird fantasy because you like weird fantasy.
Yeah, I think that's fine for me.
Okay, you're gonna stick with that one. Okay, I'll ask you for the long version later. And let's move on to this side, Mitchell.
Hi, I'm Mitchell Lüthi. I write a mix of historical fiction, dark fantasy, and horror. And the reason why, I guess I'm fascinated with the sort of themes and the characters that emerge in those sort of stories. So that's the why.
Thank you. And Jen?
I'm Jen Thorpe, and I write a bunch of different things, including speculative political fiction. And why do I write different things? So I can procrastinate mostly from one project to the next. Yeah.
Is this a sort of like productive procrastination where you advance the project by avoiding the other projects?
That's pretty much what I do all day long, yeah.
That's working out pretty well for you because you have published how many novels? How many books?
I have published 2 novels and 3 essay collections and 2 children's books and 1 nonfiction. Yeah.
That is very impressive. Well done.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I would like to start off with all of you, and I think it's one of the interesting ones that you all will have quite a different answer to, is how did you get published? Personally fascinated by this because I think there are a lot of people around who feel like they've got a book in them or literally have a book in their drawer and they don't quite know how to cross that threshold. Let's start with you, Jen.
So the first book that I published was a collection of women's writing, and so I approached, there is a women's only publisher in Cape Town called Majaji, and I approached Colleen and sent the manuscript to her, and she was very receptive, and she's incredibly responsive on email. So if you are a woman writing about women's issues or anything at all, definitely try her. And then with my novel, I just sort of started sending it out to South African publishers. Most of them have the how to send it on their website. And I started with Penguin, and I got lucky enough that Penguin published my first novel. So, yeah, it was pretty much a spray and pray approach to publishing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I cheated. I set up my own publishing company and started doing books and audiobooks and radio plays, radio theater, so sort of Spotify, podcast shows. Started taking submissions for anthologies, themed anthologies, and snuck one of my own stories in there with the rest. And that's how it started.
You should probably sneak in the name of your publishing
It's
house.
Sentinel Creatives.
Sentinel Creatives?
Sentinel Creatives. So we do open submissions every year for different themed, collections. So yeah, I love having local authors in there when we get the chance.
What was the impetus to cheat rather than go via the other route, the traditional route?
So the main reason was we wanted to do, so me and a couple of friends, we wanted to be able to make podcast shows with the stories. So they come with music, sound effects, you know, the immersive radio play versions, short stories, you know, 30-minute productions. And that was what encouraged us to start writing and putting together these collections, because then we can take stories from there, put them on a podcast, and yeah, it slowly grew from there. And that was, I guess, the reason we started.
Ah, cool. Thank you.
I started out in short fiction. So I was writing short fiction to try and get published in magazines, mostly online magazines for science fiction and fantasy. And because of that, I was quite clued into submission windows and submission calls. So in 2016, I think, Tor.com Publishing had a submission call for non-European fantasy. And I thought, sweet, I can try for that. So I wrote a novella for that submission call and waited 2 years for them to respond to it and assumed they had lost it. And then they got back to me and were like, well, cool, we'll publish this. So that was how I got in. And then subsequently have just clung to that publisher and tried to get them to publish more books by me, which so far has worked. I'm hoping the trajectory continues.
Wait, no, but 2 years. Surely you'd given up.
2 years is nothing. I've discovered this now. I'm just like, that is nothing in publishing. The industry moves exceptionally slowly, and it moves even slower if you are successful, in a sense, because if you're not very good, they'll reject you quickly and you can move on with your life. If you're slightly better, it can take a really long time to hear from anyone. So yeah, I think you have to be quite patient in this industry.
I feel like I need to go back and open up my old email account because
yeah, just go
5
check.
years ago I might
it might be in those.
I might be missing out on something. Never change your email account.
So, I mean, it wasn't an easy journey for me. Like the first novel I wrote just got rejected out and out by every publisher in South Africa. So I gave up for years. I started writing columns for like magazines like Marie Claire and GQ and Cosmo, and then more journalistic stuff like for New Frame, Mail and Guardian. And my first publisher saw my columns online and then approached me to write long fiction. She'd also seen a short story that I did. So, I mean, so my publisher came to me, but this was after I just got totally rejected. So it was a longer, kind of devastating route to get there.
Did you? Was there a feeling of vindication at last?
Yeah, I guess. So I was like, well, shit, why didn't you see this before? But I also know that if my first novel were to be published now, I would be horrified. So I'm also grateful that it didn't get published because I would not have, I kind of hate it now. I don't want to reread it ever.
Dealing with rejection is kind of the quintessential famous part of being an artist and putting yourself out there. How do you deal with it? Did you deal with it?
I didn't initially. I took a really hard knock. Like I felt I had a massive blow to my confidence. It's like I said, I gave up. I stopped writing fiction completely for a couple of years. I just stopped. So that's how I dealt with it. I just left it for a while and then started picking it up again, but in different writing forms that weren't as high stakes for me, if I can put it like that.
And Kerstin, what did you do during those 2 years?
Well, I kept writing, so I assumed that one was rejected, so I just kept trying to write different things instead. I was writing a novel at the time, so I just proceeded with that, and then when they accepted the novella that I'd sent them, they were like, do you have anything else? And I was like, well, fancy that. So I then sent them my novel. So that worked out quite well for me. But I think with regards to dealing with rejection, short fiction can be helpful, not in terms of honing your craft, well, that as well, but because they're quite different skill sets. But in terms of getting used to the idea that no isn't necessarily personal. These magazines get hundreds and thousands of submissions. The odds are not in your favor. So it becomes less of a like stab to the heart every time someone says no, knowing that a yes would mean like you've gotten significantly further.
All right, thank you. And Mitchell, how do you deal with the no?
badly. Yeah, I guess the first real encounter I had with any of those sort of things was writing a short story for a company that was doing a Kickstarter. And unfortunately for them, they sort of closed down after that. So I don't even know if there was a no or if it was just they were shut down. Probably because my story was so bad. But no, other than that, I mean, going into publishing, like indie publishing is, I mean, it's a different sort of approach entirely. There is no, but sometimes there should be a no. You know, and then you're the one that has to tell other authors that submit that their stories didn't really, you know, they weren't correct for the anthology or whatever. So I guess I get to see both sides of the struggle there.
Yeah, how do you give a kind no?
It's personable, so read the story, you know, actually engage with the content matter, don't just copy paste rejections. Actually look, we're lucky enough in that we have, you know, a couple hundred submissions, not thousands and thousands. So we don't have to, you know, just sort of get through them as quickly as we can. What we want to do is we're searching for good stories, and then we can say what we liked, what we didn't like. If there is something, often it's because it doesn't quite fit the theme. People have stories that they're ready to send out as soon as they see submissions. And sometimes it's not quite what you're looking for. It doesn't quite suit the theme. And those are easier to say, look, we loved your writing, but, you know, didn't quite fit what we were looking for. And yeah, if it's a new writer, amateur writers, you know, you can sort of guide them through the process, the formatting, you know, those sort of things. But yeah, you've got to be personable with those sort of things.
And Jen, you want to weigh in?
I think I have probably a bad ego problem, and that's also why I do productive procrastination, because I feel like if I make each project feel like they're not that important to me, I'm doing a little bit here, I'm doing a little bit there, then if someone says no, I'm like, it doesn't matter, I'm doing these other things anyway, and that sort of helps you keep going. But I don't deal very well with rejection. I do take serious knocks, and I submitted a second novel to Penguin after The Peculiars, and it was an outright no, like not even a very polite, nice one, just like a cheers, it's been nice knowing you. And it was really hard to think. I was like, am I like a one-hit wonder? Do I have nothing left in me? And I just decided to keep trying and keep writing, and I'm really crap at short stories, so I don't have that as an outlet, but just to keep writing something, you know, so that you feel like you're at least trying. But I've recently become a mom, and trying to find the mental headspace to still be a writer is really hard. And I think it's nice to hear how people are getting through the no's, because sort of it's like a no to yourself when you're super busy and your head's all over the show. So very motivating to hear from everyone what they did, so that I can start writing again. Yeah.
All right. Yes. My next question is basically, what is the appeal of speculative fiction? Rather than working in a literary mode, in a pure realism, why delve into the fantastic, the what ifs, and the warping of reality? I know that basically each of you do it in your own different way, and so I hope that you all have different perspectives on that. Who am I going to start with this time? Mia, you made eye contact.
So I think the cool thing about speculative fiction is you can create the world that you want that you didn't have necessarily. So for me, I wanted revenge on a lot of people and issues. And so I just made a world in which that vengeance was able to be exacted. Like the vengeance would happen through the elements, through the rain, through the eclipse, and it would totally fuck people up. So I got to destroy things that I couldn't destroy in reality, and that was really cathartic for me. So I think that's what I like about speculative fiction.
Did you send a copy of the book to specific people who needed to be revenged upon?
No. I wouldn't, but maybe I should.
Well, that's kind of hopeful anyway. All right, Kerstin?
I think I write it mostly because, one, it's my favorite, and two, because it plays to my skill set. If there's one thing that I get complimented on consistently, it's world building. So if I get to make up all the rules and I get to be as weird and fantastical as I want, then I tend to get more praise. And as a writer, I really like praise. So I just play to what I'm good at.
Okay, well, I'm going to praise you right now. Your world building is fantastic.
I didn't know you'd read my book.
Yeah, well, I haven't read your book, no, but I read The Border Keeper.
That is a book.
I thought it was a novella.
It is. That's still a book.
Okay, it's like a small book.
It's a pint size.
Now I don't know. I feel like
I'll give you another one.
I'm digging my own hole now. I'm so sorry. And it's one of the best and most original world building in the fantasy sphere that I've read in so long.
Thank you. This is wonderful for my ego. Like, I'm just.
Awesome. Yeah. That's great. Good job. All right. Mitchell?
All right, so I guess with obviously the world building is, I think, a great appeal to me too. And then with horror particularly, an aspect of it is dealing with themes that people would otherwise rather not confront. I think that's a great definition for horror. It's dealing with ideas and themes that are other. They're from the outside of the norm, and that falls into weird fiction too, sort of cosmic horror. And yeah, I enjoy exploring those sort of tracks with, I guess, the historical fiction, religious stuff, folklore, digging into it from that perspective, just really dealing with those themes and in, I guess, a non-trivial way. And yeah, that's what appeals to me about the horror genre and what I've been doing.
Nice. And Jen?
I like it as a form of social commentary. I think you've got a little bit more space to critique the way the real world is when you're writing the world at a little bit of an angle. You're able to see what's messed up in our world by making a world that's similarly messed up but with a little twist. And it allows you to say things that if you wrote it as in a normal fiction would be a bit on the nose. And you also, like in the fall, I have a pool full of magical creatures, which is like almost a commentary on the fire pool saga with Zuma. Like, if I had written a book where I was just talking about how ridiculous our politics was, we know that. We all read the news. So to write it where it's a bit magical and it's a bit playful, it's much more fun, and you still get to have the same message and like critique going through your story as well. So, yeah.
So this is kind of for Jen and Mia. Both of your books, they're set in a Cape Town or a not quite now. Yours is a little bit in the future, again, bending the laws of reality. You as well, shifting into the fantastical, the magical realism. What makes that genre more appealing to South Africans than other fantasy? Because I think most of the sort of high fantasy writers in South Africa, they do most of their sales overseas. Whereas locally, your two books have been quite successful. And you see the same with, Lauren Bierkes' Moxieland and such.
I think we are generally a political country. Like, most of us have some interest in what's going on in the news. Even if we're not reading it every day, we all feel quite engaged. And I think that's part of our history. So when you write about the not quite now, the just now, the now, people can see that happening. People can, immerse themselves in the story and imagine what it would be like for them. I also think maybe the fantasy writers are just, more talented at writing for an international audience because we are so local. And if I had to write The Fall without making it as local as it was, it wouldn't feel right to me. And so it's not necessarily translatable into a global audience because they don't get what I'm trying to say. But a fantasy writer has more world-building potential, more wild stuff that they can do that isn't so South African. But I would hope, I think Lauren Bierkes is an incredible exception. She's published all around the world in multiple languages, and she somehow manages to make the South African flavor tasty to an international audience. And I think if we could all just, put that in our veins, we would be doing it right now. Yeah.
So I think, for me, I try and write what I know in the place that I know, and then take magical elements and imbue the world that I already know with that. And I think my most recent publisher called that low fantasy. It was the first time I ever heard that word. And what that means is it's fantasy, but in a very familiar context. It's the opposite of high fantasy, obviously. I think it's a bit closer to magic realism. And I find it easier to write that way because the neuroses that you can explore are very real and familiar to you. I think obviously the disadvantage is that it doesn't have as much international appeal. Like, I write a lot of my books in caps. I've asked so many times for a glossary, which I refuse to provide. So it does become limiting in that way. But I also think it can be real and, like Jen was saying as well, provide a certain kind of social commentary that is quite important in that way as well, because it is happening in a place and time that you recognize but also don't recognize. Like, I've got blood falling onto Table Mountain. It's an image that everybody knows. If I set a magic realism scene in Kales River, it's a place you can envision, and I like that, that balance.
Thank you. Mitchell, I think one of the exceptions is horror, how appealing that horror is almost universally. Why do you think that is?
So I think that's tricky. Horror, I've recently discovered, has got a variety of flavors. There comes, and you'll find it on like some of the horror groups online, where there's like splatter punk and all these like really brutal sort of genres of horror fiction. And I'd never really encountered them, and people love the taboo about it. Like there's a thrill there because it's something horrendous and there's something naughty about it. You know, you shouldn't be reading these sort of things. So that, in one sense, appeals to people's nature in that way. And then there's, I guess, the Stephen Kings and the more commercially viable horror. And that, I think, it probably tacks on with what I said earlier about themes. You're grappling with something that you'd rather not, or you wouldn't want to be presented with every day, and what contradictions arise as a result from that. Like it normally triggers some sort of story, some sort of character development. You find your characters in the worst imaginable places. How do they react? And it's because we like stories about human nature. So I think that has a big element. Or you just like gory stuff. So it's one or the other, I think.
All right, and I'm going to bounce to the last person for this question. Kerstin, despite the room full of people who are passionate about fantasy, why do you think that high fantasy doesn't sell as well in South Africa as it does internationally?
I think that our reading audience in general is really small. So if you'd subdivide that into smaller and smaller niches, like there isn't enough of a reader base in South Africa to support high fantasy in particular. And because it's stratified in that way, I don't think that it can grow as like vicariously as it can overseas. So I make virtually no sales in South Africa, and that's fine. Sometimes I'd like to see my books in exclusive books, but hey, it's not. No.
You didn't want to like maybe guerrilla in one, just like a one print copy. Just put it on the middle of the stand.
Just like, here you go, on the display table, buy my book.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. I think that I think if people in the audience, for example, want to go down the epic fantasy or more specific fantasy genres that have a very niche audience, in a sense, I would recommend looking to publish internationally. I remember a few years ago that if you wanted to publish one of those books, say at Penguin Random House Strace, where I was briefly interning, they even say on the website, we don't accept fantasy and science fiction submissions. And I don't know if that's still true, but it doesn't exactly set like the most comfortable and welcoming environment for those sort of books.
All right. I'm going to move on for that one to kind of probably like a more existential, broad question. I'm so sorry. The world feels like it's constantly changing. It feels like maybe this is just my impression, and that actually the world is just as crazy and messed up as it always has been. But it does feel like we're in a point of technology, global politics, that things feel unstable. How does creating art in this environment, in this moment, feel? And can you do it and stay relevant? Who wants to go first?
I'll start with this one. So I guess with the advent of AI and the sort of language models, we've seen it probably with the art community the most. They got hit the hardest straight away. A lot of them have been, their feathers have been ruffled, I think rightfully so, because suddenly you have this technology that can replicate and create something that it would take a skilled eye to really determine that it's fake. And in a couple of years' time, you won't be able to tell. And I think the same is true for writing, with the exception of, at the moment, if you actually play with these models, you'll see that they're very good at writing cliched sort of things. So it will be generic. The prose will be very watered down. It will say on a dark and stormy night and think that's a good line. And that's something that's going to take a while for, I think, those sort of programs to adjust to and adapt to. But eventually, they will be able to probably write, as well a story as Stephen King or any of these other big authors. So how do you stop that? I think eventually this is another case where technology is advancing quicker than the laws will be able to, because there is data protection problems here. There is data scraping that's going on. There's copyrighted material. It means that your copyrighted work doesn't actually have any protection at the moment. What does that mean? So what is the point of copyright? So obviously the law needs to adapt, and it's probably going to take years. I mean, in South Africa it will take 5-10 years of any. But internationally, it's going to take a long time for us to adjust to that. And in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of people falling through the cracks, creatives, and it's got to the point where you can put together audiobooks with AI voices, training the AI on a person's voice, and it sounds indistinguishable. So yeah, this is one of those big things where the law needs to catch up with the technology, and I don't know if individuals are really able to do anything, aside from hope for the best.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's just not explicitly illegal, so it's kind of legal. For instance, as you were talking about the audiobook narrator, there is a narrator who died 10 years ago, but they've got all his back catalog of his voice, so they just digitized it. Because no one said, hey, you're not allowed to turn me into an undead newsreader for the rest of eternity. So what's the legal protection for things that we don't even know yet?
So there's one thing, which is that you'll probably see in the next couple of years, but Disney and these big animation companies, they're probably going to step in, because in a few years' time, you and me will be able to make movies like that on our computers or our phones or whatever. And that's against their interest, and that's probably the only way that you can really fight these things, is by putting another monster in the ring with the new monster. But yeah, I think that's probably the only way that it's going to change.
And Jen, as a writer who also deeply steeped in like the politics and philosophy of feminism in this moment, how do you feel? How do you stay relevant?
How do I stay relevant? I think you almost have to stay a little bit on top of it, but to the side. So you have to be paying attention to what's going on and making sure that you're having a conversation about that, so that there's some sort of narrative or discourse around the pros and cons. I think these creative technologies are really, really interesting for what they teach us about the way that we think at the moment. So, ChatGPT can only write you a story based on what's already on the internet. So when you get a story out of it, it sort of tells you a secondary story about what knowledge we're all drawing on, and that's very interesting. And I think writing about, that meta level, that next level up, is something that creatives and feminists and analysts all over the world will be doing anyway. Most of us who are creatives are acting under some sort of weird madness or compulsion. Even if a computer is doing it better than us, we're probably still going to do it because it feels like something that we have to do to feel human in the world. Definitely if ChatGPT kicks my butt at writing novels, I'm probably still going to write shitty novels because I have to write novels, else I feel insane. So I think, same with feminism, if I'm not looking at the world through that lens, if I'm not critiquing what's going on and thinking about it, I wouldn't be who I was. And so even if a computer does it better, I'm still going to keep doing it and putting my voice out there in the best way that I can. Yeah.
All right, and I'm going to jump to Mia. Mia, how are you doing?
Great, how are you doing?
Okay, the world is full of upheaval, there's wars all over, we're running out of resources. What are we going to do? How do we stay relevant as artists? Shouldn't we just be holding water rather than writing?
No, I think let's just write until we starve and die. It's cool. I think one way of staying relevant is to stay up to date, it's going to sound a bit cuck, but I mean, to make it more multimedia, to be accessible to social media, to create like short videos, to create a Spotify playlist around your fiction. Like I did a bit of that with my debut, my only novel. Like I had a music element, voiceover elements, images, tarot cards online. Like I did, that it was a multimedia experience. So I tried to make it one. I think that's one way of trying to stay relevant. I don't think it's enough, given that we are dealing with AI. But I mean, you can use ChatGPT in a specific way. You can use it to do like light research or to bounce ideas. You don't have to use it to write for you. So I think it's also about how you choose to engage with technology. You can do it in a way that's not unethical as well. I think you have to be smart and deliberate about how you do it.
And it's you.
Same question. I think that the danger might be slightly overblown, and I really hope I'm right. But the thing is, I don't want to read an AI-generated novel because it does not remotely interest me, because I don't think the machine has anything to say. Like, it can only regurgitate what's already been put into it, which means there's no real intention behind what's being written. So for me, that's not interesting. That doesn't tell a story in a way that engages me. And so I don't think that there's going to be as much demand for, an anthology entirely generated by a robot. Like, what are you getting out of that? In terms of remaining relevant, I don't know. I think my focus is more on being good and just hoping that that's enough. So instead of chasing trends or trying to master social media, which I never will, I just try to put that effort into my craft and hope that it pans out, because it's not something I can control.
There is a big pressure on artists and creatives to be the entire pipeline.
This is the problem, because when you write something, you want to hand it over to somebody else, and then they get to do the marketing for you. And now you're the one that they're handing stories to. And it's like, so how do I make sure that this gets into the right hands, and the people that read it are the people that want to read it? And, you know, with the audience, with the podcasts and stuff like that, there's a lot of pressure. And I guess the difference between, as you said, with South Africa, is a very small market here. So when you publish something and you send it into the void here, the chances of you getting it into the hands of like a dark fantasy reader or whatever, quite slim, given just the proportion of readers that there will be. But in the United States, you know, you're a massive market for these sort of things. So you have to foster a community amongst other publishing houses, other, you know, indie authors, and slowly network like that, which is hard itself because, you know, you lack the context. You don't live there. You don't have the same experiences there. Like yesterday was Indie Book Day. Or Indie Bookstore Day. We don't even have indie books here, bookstores here really. You know, we got a couple, maybe one in Cape Town, and it's very small. So they're a completely different scene. It's thriving, you know, and you have now me as an outsider in our little publishing house has to get in there and speak to those sort of people without being cynical about it. Because, you know, at the end of the day, you're trying to sell your product. So that brings, at the end of the day, you have to make a good product and hope that it does the work. But then you also have to do the slog of social media every day and posting updates all the time and having content all the time. And that's tiring. Yeah. It's very, very tiring.
And Jen, as someone who works in multiple genres, do you have anything to add on that?
I'm pretty shit at social media. I used to be really into it, and now I just feel tired when I look at it. I think I don't know what I'm doing. It's going too fast. But I think when you write lots of different things, you have as Kerstin was saying, you have very different audiences. And our audiences in South Africa are very sort of, people read self-help books and other people read fiction, and other people read literary fiction only. So, you know, I think trying to find your lane and trying to do well in your lane is probably a good strategy. And if you can do a little bit on social media or get a good team behind you who can help you, you'll probably be okay.
So I want to bring up something that has been kind of causing a lot of furore on. Did I say the word right? Good, thanks. Sometimes it's my word of the day today, and I don't always get them right. Anyway, causing a bit of a furore online is the idea of boulderization of stories. We had Roald Dahl's Roald Dahl's publisher re-releasing some books without the use of words like fat and ugly. As descriptors, as moral descriptors, I think. The legacy of books is one that can both be like fixed. It's a concrete object that sits somewhere in the world, but then also it is revisited. They're republished and they reposted, and now we have ebooks. How do you feel about your words possibly being changed after you pass on? Let's start on this side. Kerstin.
I really don't think there's much of a risk, because I don't think I'm important enough. No, I think that... Yet, maybe. I think that stuff like the recent Roald Dahl thing, I don't really care. I'm just there. It's publishers trying to make money by staying relevant with old titles. I would much prefer if they marketed their new titles instead of falling back on their backlist. In the absence of that, if they want to change some words in Roald Dahl, like, I don't care. Like, whatever. Like, it's fine. If that makes them more money, then that money goes towards supporting their mid-list authors, and I might get more in my advance. So on a selfish level, maybe it's a good thing. But yeah.
A wonderfully honest answer. Thank you. Mia?
So a friend of mine who teaches literature at UCT, she was teaching my novel for a while, and she told me about this quote, and I can't remember who said it, but the quote is that the author is dead. And that really resonated with me, because a lot of people have different interpretations of my book, and it used to not upset me, but I used to find it a bit annoying, and now I'm just like, well, it doesn't matter. I don't matter to this process. And that's really what I think, is that the author is dead. Your work is your work, and once you finish it, or once I finish it, it's external to me, and I let it go, and then it exists on its own, you know.
Okay, thank you. Jen?
I kind of like the idea of a footnote. So like if you're going to change it, if you could flag that with a footnote and explain something about why or what was going on in the time or what you think was going on at the time it was written that allowed a person to say something that is now no longer sayable. I think that's important for people who are reading it in the future. You know, like the generation that's coming up after us now is a generation that's never lived without social media. So to try and explain what things were like before then is really tricky. But if you have a footnote and give a bit of context, it makes the whole thing more cohesive and interesting. I would be interested to read why words had been changed. I don't know if I'm just a nerd, but I think that would be a nice way to go about it.
Mitchell, do you have anything to add?
I guess there's two ways to go about this. One is that what is the intention of the story and the writer, and what is the intention picking up the book? Is it just for pleasure, for joy? If you're reading something and you get offended by it, is that the reason why you'd want to change it? Because if that is the case, I guess it's different to looking at something from the historical record and being like, this is important because it, features characters from a time and a place that are different to our own, from an author who wrote at a different time to our own. So take like Satanic Verses from Rushdie. If you looked at that and you're like, I'm reading this for pleasure, and we should change this so that people only experience pleasure when they read this, you would change everything in that book. And makes it complicated. So I think a footnote would be the best way to approach those sort of, those sort of stories, those sort of books. But also, the intention of the story and of the writer behind it. And when you're reading it, is this a classic or is this just a book for fun? I guess that's where the difference really comes in. But yeah.
All right, thank you. We've just got a little bit of time left, so I'm going to hit you all with the final question. And that's basically, this is your opportunity to call out someone who doesn't get enough credit, or someone who just inspires you as a writer or a human, I guess, because we are all humans and we're not replaced by AI yet. Cool. Who wants to start? All right.
I really like Robert Jackson Bennett. And if you guys haven't read him, he's fantastic. You should look up his books. I don't know if he's massively underappreciated, but he's really fun. So I would look up City of Stairs. In terms of like inspirations, I really, really love Anne Leckie. I'm not ever going to be as good as her, but if like I had a role model, Anne Leckie.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think most writers don't get enough credit, so let me start there. Particularly South African writers, but all writers, really, most writers don't get enough credit. The few that some of them that I can think of, just locally, would be Alistair Mackay, Chase Riss, Kelly Eve Koopman. I mean, for me, they could get. I think they should get bigger reach, but again, they're locally set. My inspirations, influences are like Tarantino and Guy Ritchie, and they definitely get enough credit, so I can't say that they need more.
All right.
There's a British author called Scarlett Thomas who writes kind of magical realism, speculative. It's kind of I don't actually know what it is, but it's pretty amazing work. Very interesting and philosophy-based, very interesting. But I agree with Mia. South African authors, if you have your 300 Rand and you're going to the bookshop, buy local, because that actually changes someone's life here. Whereas the international stuff, they get loads of money. That's how they're here in the first place. Like, if you don't support the local audience, we're not going to get local stories that matter to us. So, that would just be any South African author writing anything, buy that.
I think biggest influence me, probably China Mabel. I've always enjoyed his work. He writes a lot of really good weird fiction. There's a lot of social and political commentary in it. And then, I don't know if I think he's pretty big now, but Christopher Bielman, he's growing at least. He's written some really good novels, Between Two Fires, Those Across the River, and he started doing independent publishing too. So some of the stories, he's got the rights back from his publisher. Now he re-releases them himself, and he's been seeing some success with that. So check him out if you haven't read him.
Great. Okay, before I release you from this stage, can you just give me your name again and what people should find about you? Your one book, your book. Yeah, the book.
Cool.
I put that really badly, but anyway, just do it. Don't worry about me. I'm just rambling now. It's okay. Carry on.
Cool. So my name is Mia Arderne. I have one novel out. It's called Mermaid Fillet or Mermaid Fillet, however you want to pronounce that word. That's it. That's me, and that's my novel.
Hi, I'm Kerstin Hall. The first 5 people who are on the stage afterwards, I have copies of my novel and I will give them to you.
First 4.
Yeah.
I was here first.
Okay, shotgun. Make that 3 because I promised someone in the audience one. So be fast. I write weird fantasy and I should have another book announcement coming out next month. Look out on tor.com.
Mitchell Lüthi, I've got a collection of short stories out, his Black Tongue, and you should check out our podcast. It's the Sentinel Creatives podcast. And yeah.
And also, they've got a stand over there. Come on, Mitchell.
We need you for our recruitment. My name is Jen Thorpe, and my speculative fiction novel is called The Fall.
Awesome, thanks. And I am John Keevy. I'm with Zarnia for Games and Geekery on YouTube, where I've actually interviewed a couple of these people, and I will try to interview the rest of them. So find us there. Anyway, thank you, Comic-Con, for having this chat with us.